Ben and Margaret Dawson once poured their hearts and health into raising their Navy SEAL son, believing family was the one thing that would never abandon them. But tonight, under a sky swollen with unending rain, they stand alone. Shutters ripped from windows, memories boxed and tossed into the back of strangers' trucks. Their only companion is Scout, the aging German shepherd their son left behind to protect them. A guardian now watching everything they worked for disappear into the storm. Margaret's trembling hand rests on his fur, oxygen tube fogging with each breath she fights to take. Ben swallows the ache in his throat. Years of sacrifice traded for silence and a single cruel truth: love is not always returned. But sometimes rescue arrives in ways we never expect. If you believe loyalty and miracles still exist, please subscribe to our channel and stay with us for this unforgettable journey. A late autumn dusk clung to the peaks of Pine Brook, Montana, the cold wind carrying the scent of snow and distant pine smoke. Henry Collins, 78, tall but bowed by the slow gravity of age, stood in the gravel driveway of the modest home he once believed would hold his family together forever. His gray hair, once thick as the forest pines, had thinned into wisps beneath his faded Navy cap, though he had never served. The hat belonged to his father, a reminder of honor Henry thought he had passed on to his own sons. Lines etched deep into his weathered face whispered of decades spent as a machinist. Long shifts, loud factories, and the quiet pride of a working man who gave everything without expecting praise. Next to him sat his wife, Margaret Collins, 76, in the passenger seat of their battered red pickup. Her breathing was shallow, each inhale tugging on the oxygen tube that fed into her nose. A once radiant woman who had sung in the Pine Brook church choir, she now carried the pale tint of long illness in her cheeks. Yet her eyes, soft blue, stubborn, and unbroken, still glimmered with a quiet fire. She gently stroked the head of Ranger, the only guardian they had left. Ranger was a stunning 3-year-old German shepherd, bred from military working lines, broad chest, thick sable and tan coat, muscular legs that moved with coiled readiness. His ears stood sharply upright, scanning every movement, every breath. He had been trained by Daniel, their eldest son, a Navy SEAL deployed somewhere unknown. Ranger had Daniel's discipline, and perhaps his heart too, loyal to a fault, fiercely protective, and silent except when duty called. Henry watched movers packing the last of their furniture onto trucks. Each scraped-up dining chair, each box marked with faded handwriting felt like a chapter of life torn away. He tightened his jaw, anger, grief, and a sting of humiliation all fighting inside him. Standing nearby was Eric Collins, their middle child, 44, stocky, with a face prematurely hardened by disappointment. He had once dreamed of owning the best steakhouse in Montana, but debt, mismanagement, and too much bourbon had soured that dream. His light brown hair was slicked back in a style trying too hard, his denim jacket new, but his eyes wary, guarded. Deep down he was ashamed, too ashamed to admit he needed his parents more than they needed him, but shame had a cruel mask, and it looked like indifference. "We can't afford this house anymore," Eric muttered, avoiding Henry's stare. "Selling it keeps everyone afloat." Next to him, their youngest, Lisa Harper, 41, stood with legal documents tucked under her arm. A lawyer with a razor-sharp mind and even sharper posture, she wore a fitted gray coat that matched her immaculate blonde hair. She had made a career in protecting the interests of powerful people. just never her own parents. Ambition had hardened her, pushing out warmth until success became the only measure of worth. Lisa approached Henry with the confidence of someone making a business transaction, not a family decision. "Dad, the nursing home in Elkwood has space. It will handle Mom's meds, her breathing treatments, everything." "And Ranger?" Henry's voice cracked like ice underfoot. Lisa's expression didn't change. "No pets allowed. He'll go to a shelter. Someone might adopt him." Ranger let out a low growl, not of aggression but hurt, the kind that comes when the world betrays the simple truth that family should never turn away family. Margaret clutched the dog tighter, as if anchoring herself to the last piece of Daniel still here. Henry's eyes burned. "We gave you this house. We paid your student loans. We helped Eric when his restaurant failed." His voice rose despite his trembling. "And you repay us by tearing apart what's left of our life?" Eric flinched but said nothing. Lisa simply pressed a manila envelope into Henry's hand. "This is the deed to Granddad's old mine claim on Silver Ridge. The cabin is still standing, sorta. You can stay there, quiet, cheap, a fresh start." But Henry heard what she didn't say. A place to disappear. Margaret whispered, "Henry, we still have Ranger, and as long as we have him, Daniel is with us too." Ranger lifted his head, sensing her fragile hope, and leaned closer. With a thundering heart and a chest full of ache, Henry turned the ignition. The truck groaned like an old man forced from his bed. Gravel spat beneath worn tires as they left the only home that had ever known their laughter. Neither child waved goodbye. As rain began to fall, Ranger raised his head toward the mountains, toward the unknown, and let out one soft, determined bark. The road ahead cut like a scar into the wilderness of Pine Brook. And, though Henry felt cast aside, something deeper stirred beneath his grief. A fragile, flickering belief that maybe the mountains were not a burial ground, but a beginning. Not swallowed Pine Brook as the truck climbed higher into the mountains, the headlights trembling against the broken road. Henry's hands, gnarled, strong, but trembling with exhaustion and dread, gripped the wheel tightly. Ranger sat upright in the back seat, ears pricked, tail stiff, every muscle alert as though he believed he alone could guide them to safety. Margaret leaned her head against the window, her breath fogging the glass, her oxygen tank softly hissing beside her. She whispered to herself like a quiet prayer, "We will be okay, won't we?" 1 hour passed, then 2. Every mile farther into the forest carved a deeper ache in Henry's chest. At last the truck rolled to a stop before a weather-beaten sign buried half under snow. Eagle's Rest, 1951. Beyond it sat the cabin, if one could still call it that. Half the roof had caved in. Windows were shattered, jagged like missing teeth. Snow had claimed the living room floor, drifted like pale ghosts across splintered wood. The porch sagged dangerously, its railings broken. Margaret let out a tremor of fear. "Daniel would never let us live like this." Henry swallowed the bitterness scraping up his throat. "Daniel isn't here." That truth weighed like a stone on both of them. Ranger leapt from the truck the moment the door cracked open. He did not bolt into the trees. He circled the cabin with sharp, tactical precision, nose low, tail high, paws silent under the snow. He stopped often, ears cocked, testing every shadow. Henry muttered, "Instinct like Daniel, loyal like Daniel." Ranger returned, nudged Henry's hand once, firm, as if to say, "We move forward." Henry lifted Margaret out of the truck, his back straining but his soul refusing to fail her. Inside, the cabin smelled of rot and long abandonment, moss, wet wood, and dust from forgotten decades. An overturned crate became a seat while Henry searched blindly through debris for anything useful. But despair crashed over him like a wave. He had brought his wife to die among ruins. Ranger suddenly growled, a low, focused vibration. He dashed toward the back door, paws scraping frantically at a half-buried wooden hatch. Henry stumbled outside to investigate. It was a root-cellar door, nearly fused shut by ice. He heaved, wood groaning until the latch gave way with a loud crack. Ranger dove inside first, tail wagging with purpose. Henry lowered his flashlight and froze. Shelves lined the concrete walls, holding dusty jars sealed tight, preserved firewood stacked in neat bundles, and, most remarkably, a metal trunk with initials carved awkwardly. E.C. Henry's grandfather, Elijah Collins, had once prospected these mountains, stubborn and hopeful even when the world said there was no gold left to find. Henry's voice broke. "You old fool, you might have saved us." Margaret descended carefully, guided by Ranger's nudge. She brushed her hand over the initials. "Your grandfather never believed in abandoning family, but Henry's pride refused to let him take comfort, not yet. He feared this was simply prolonging the inevitable. They carried enough supplies to last, maybe a week. Margaret's medications would run out much sooner. He looked at his wife, frail shoulders beneath a thick coat, wisps of silver hair escaping beneath her knitted hat, and wondered if he could keep her alive here. Ranger pressed close to Margaret's side, letting her rest a hand on his sturdy back. His eyes, deep brown, intelligent, fiercely protective, never left her face. It was as if he knew where the real danger lay. Not outside in the dark woods, but inside her lungs struggling to find air. Henry sank onto a crate in defeat, burying his face in his hands. "I've failed you," he whispered to Margaret. "Failed our son. Failed everything." Margaret touched his shoulder, her voice steady despite tremors. "You built a life. You raised children. You loved us. That is not failure." Ranger's ears shot forward. He stared toward the open cabin door, tail stiffening like a drawn bow. The wind silenced for a moment as he listened. A soft growl rose in his chest, not fear, but vigilance. Henry followed the dog's gaze. Nothing moved, nothing visible. Yet Henry felt it too. The mountains were breathing around them, watching. The cabin creaked, snow shifted, something unseen whispered through the pines. Margaret squeezed Henry's hand. "The mountains are not sending us away." Ranger took one determined step toward the door, then looked back at them, expecting. Henry exhaled. "All right, soldier, we stay." Ranger lay between them that night, curled like a shield. Outside the wind howled, but inside, for the first time in months, Margaret fell asleep not with fear, but with hope. And Henry, though still afraid, felt a spark form in the ashes of his heart. They were not gone. They were not done. Not yet. Morning arrived with a brittle silence, the kind that only mountains understand. Frost clung to the jagged porch beams as Henry stepped outside, stretching his aching back while Ranger began his usual perimeter sweep. Nose low, movements precise, every sense evaluating their new territory. Margaret remained inside the cabin, seated on a makeshift chair beside the cracked window, sunlight brushing her pale cheeks. Her breathing sounded rougher this morning, a dry rattle beneath every inhale. She tried to hide the discomfort, but Ranger noticed. He paused mid-stride, ears flicking back toward her, eyes narrowing with concern. Henry caught the look. He knelt beside the dog, placing a work-worn hand atop Ranger's sturdy shoulder. "I know, boy. I'm worried, too." Ranger nudged Henry's chest once, then trotted toward the tree line, pausing every few steps, glancing back as though urging Henry to follow. Henry sighed, but something in the dog's unwavering stare made him pull on his coat. "Margaret, I'll be just outside. Ranger wants to, well, show me something." Margaret mustered a smile. "I'll be here. Don't worry, love." That promise sounded thin, but Henry pretended not to notice. He followed Ranger into the wilderness behind the cabin. The ground sloped upward, scattered with fallen branches and patches of stubborn grass that refused to die beneath winter's creeping breath. Despite the cold air biting into his lungs, Henry pushed forward, guided by Ranger's unwavering pace. They passed moss-coated boulders and twisted pines whose roots gripped the mountainside like ancient fists. Henry's legs throbbed with each ascent, but Ranger stayed careful, pausing whenever Henry faltered, offering silent patience like Daniel always did when helping him stand from a chair. After nearly 20 minutes, the forest opened into a small basin, sheltered between two ridges. Steam curled lazily from a shimmering pool in the center, dissipating into the cold air like soft prayers. A natural hot spring. The water was crystal clear, with faint mineral scents of sulfur and earth. Smooth stones lined the edges, warm despite the frozen soil surrounding them. Henry blinked, astonished. Ranger had led them to warmth hidden in a world of cold. The dog dipped one paw into the water, then looked up, tail lifting with certainty. Henry knelt. He had never believed in miracles, only in hard work and responsibility, but in this moment he felt something like gratitude tug behind his ribs. He touched the surface. Heat seeped into his fingers, soothing the stubborn ache in his joints. He couldn't help a quiet, cracked laugh. "You're something special, aren't you?" Ranger gave a soft bark, just one, before turning back toward the cabin. He wanted Margaret. Henry realized it too. The spring wasn't meant for him. It was for her. The climb back felt easier. Hope has a way of lightening old bones. Inside the cabin, Margaret's condition had worsened. Her hands trembled, and her breaths cut sharp like tearing paper. Fear clawed up Henry's throat. "We're going somewhere," he told her, trying not to sound desperate. "Ranger found something." He wrapped her carefully in their warmest blanket, secured her oxygen tank, and with Ranger's constant guidance, helped her outside. Every few steps she paused, leaning heavily into Henry's side. Ranger stayed pressed against her opposite leg, supporting her balance. "He's acting like a trained medic," Margaret whispered with a weak smile. "Better than any we've met," Henry replied. When they finally reached the spring, Ranger sat proudly at the water's edge, as if guarding sacred ground. Henry helped Margaret settle onto a flat stone, lowering her legs into the steaming pool. The heat wrapped around her like a living thing. She inhaled, once, twice, and the tightness in her chest loosened just enough that her face relaxed. Tears slipped down Henry's cheeks before he could stop them. Margaret noticed, reaching up with a tired hand to brush his face. "I'm still here," she murmured. Ranger laid beside her, head resting on her knee, his gaze fierce and tender at once. As minutes passed, color returned to Margaret's cheeks, her breathing quieter, smoother. The miracle was small but undeniable, relief where there had been fear. When they finally began to head home, Henry glanced back at the pool. The water rippled in the mountain breeze like a heartbeat. Ranger paused, too, sitting with regal stillness. His eyes reflected the pools of his ancestors, soldier dogs who had protected the Collins men long before Daniel was born. "You knew," Henry whispered. "Somehow you knew." Ranger didn't move, but Henry felt something shift deep inside. A belief he had lost long ago. Things unseen can still save us. They reached the cabin door just as dusk returned, and for the first time since being abandoned by their own children, Henry dared to imagine tomorrow. The mountains hadn't rejected them, not tonight, perhaps not ever. Wind curled through the pines the next morning, brisk and restless as though the mountain itself had a secret to share. The improvement in Margaret's breathing, so subtle but real, gave Henry renewed strength. He built a fire, repaired a broken window with scrap wood, and even joked once or twice. Margaret watched him with quiet awe. She hadn't seen that spark in his eyes since before Daniel left for deployment. Ranger wandered in and out of the cabin like a soldier doing rounds, but his posture today shifted. Tail held stiff, ears scanning the distance more than usual. Something had changed in the air. Near midday, the low rumble of an engine echoed down the ravine. Henry and Margaret startled. No one had come this deep into Silver Ridge in years. Ranger launched into a protective stance, body angled slightly forward, ready to place himself between danger and his small, fragile unit. A black pickup appeared, inching cautiously up the rocky path. Mud splattered over the sides suggested a long drive through rough territory. The engine coughed to silence. A figure stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a forest green uniform with the wildlife insignia over the chest. He removed his hat, revealing short brown hair slightly tousled by the wind. A trimmed beard framed a strong jaw, but his eyes, hazel with flecks of gold, held a weariness earned from too many crisis calls no one else wanted. His name tag read, Deputy Forest Ranger Adam Hayes. Adam was in his mid-30s, fit but with slight tension in his left leg, an old injury that made him favor one side. Rumor in Pine Brook whispered he'd once been a promising Marine, before a mountain rescue that went wrong left him with both a limp and survivor's guilt. Those who knew him said he'd left the military not because he couldn't handle danger, but because he cared too much about the lives he couldn't save. He raised a hand in a non-threatening greeting. "Afternoon. I saw smoke up here. Thought maybe we had a hunter or someone lost." His voice carried a rugged politeness, edged with curiosity. Henry stepped forward, shoulders stiff. "We're not trespassing. This is my grandfather's land." "I believe you," Adam said, calm and sincere. He scanned the area. Shattered porch, damaged roof, patched windows, concern flickering over his face. "Didn't expect anyone to try living up here. Silver Ridge isn't exactly friendly this time of year." Margaret appeared beside Henry with Ranger pressed against her side like a living shield. Adam's gaze softened when he saw her oxygen tank. "Ma'am, you shouldn't be this far from medical help." Margaret smiled, fragile but proud. "We didn't come here by choice, but this place has given me something back." Before Adam could ask what she meant, Ranger lunged forward, not to attack, but to grab his pant hem and tug sharply. Then the dog turned and sprinted toward the tree line, pausing to look back with urgency. Adam jumped slightly, startled. "What's he doing?" Henry exhaled. He wants us to follow. Ranger barked twice, sharp, commanding, a military order if there ever was one. Adam hesitated only a second before nodding. All right, lead the way, soldier. The three humans followed Ranger through the trail he had carved the day before. When the trees opened and the steam of the hot spring rose into view, Adam froze in astonishment. I've hiked these ridges for years. Never knew this was here. He crouched near the edge, feeling the warm mist brush his skin. This could keep someone alive in winter. Margaret eased closer, lowering a hand into the water. Color still warmed her cheeks from yesterday's visit. It already has. Adam studied her again, noting the steadier rhythm of her chest, the life quietly returning. He didn't speak for a long moment, his thoughts visible in the shifting of his brow. Finally, he said, low and reverent, "Maybe this place is watching over you." Henry looked at Ranger, who now sat proudly like a guardian placed by fate. "Maybe he is." Adam straightened, resolve settling into his posture. "Let me help you. You shouldn't have to survive alone. I can bring supplies, check in, at least until your son comes home." The words "your son" hung heavy between them, a tender bruise, pressed but not broken. Henry nodded, unable to speak. Margaret reached for Adam's hand briefly, gratitude shining in her eyes. Ranger leaned against Henry, satisfied with his accomplishment. The mountains, once silent and merciless, now seemed to breathe with possibility. Silver Ridge was no longer empty. Someone had found them, and someone cared. Snow melted in patches across Silver Ridge as winter loosened its grip, revealing hopeful streaks of earth and young grass. Morning sunlight flowed through the window of the restored cabin, warmer now thanks to Henry's repairs and Adam's help hauling new lumber up the trail. Margaret sat near the fire, oxygen tank set aside for the moment. Her breaths deeper, steadier, as though the mountain itself had become her lungs. Ranger lay stretched beside her feet, eyes alert and tail thumping whenever she moved, proud of every victory her body made. Adam Hayes had held true to his promise. He came every few days, bringing canned food, medicine, fuel, and, importantly, companionship that Henry hadn't realized he desperately needed. Each visit chipped away at the sense of abandonment that had weighed on Henry's spirit like lead. Today, Adam arrived earlier than usual. His boots crunched on snow, and he stepped inside with a cautious smile, carrying a backpack stuffed full. His uniform jacket looked slightly more worn than before, sun-faded patches on the shoulders. "Hope I'm not intrudin'," he said, though his tone already carried a familiarity that felt like family approaching a door rather than a stranger seeking permission. "Never an intrusion," Henry replied, clapping Adam's shoulder. "Coffee's heatin'." Margaret waved him closer. "You look like you've been wrestling bears again." Adam chuckled, scratching the back of his neck, a habit of his when embarrassed. But before he could answer, Ranger jumped up and dashed outside, barking sharply. Adam's expression shifted immediately. Marine instincts wakened beneath the forest ranger uniform. He followed the dog out, Henry right behind him. Ranger stood poised at the ridge overlooking the valley. A distant engine hummed through the trees, familiar, cautious, hopeful. Then came a sound Henry hadn't heard in years. A short whistle, 3 notes, the exact one Daniel used during training sessions with Ranger. Henry's heart seized. Ranger bolted, pure streak of muscle and joy down the trail. A figure emerged from the tree line, tall, lean, shoulders squared with military precision. His uniform was dusted with long travel, patches marking elite Navy SEAL deployment. His face, bronze skin, short, dark brown hair, days-old beard, carried exhaustion and pain and hope all woven into one. Daniel Collins had come home. Ranger crashed into him, tail thrashing wildly, barking and whining with unrestrained love. Daniel dropped on his knees, arms locked around the dog's neck, burying his face into sable fur. Emotion tore through Henry before he could steel himself. He stumbled forward, Margaret close behind, supported by her cane and sheer adrenaline. Daniel rose, eyes wet, jaw trembling, and rushed into his parents' arms. "I got your letters," he said, voice cracking like thin ice. "I came as fast as I could." Henry gripped his shoulders, staring at his boy, no, his man, trying to memorize every new line etched into his face. We thought you'd never." Daniel shook his head, pressing his forehead to Margaret's. "I promised I'd come home. Ranger kept you alive for me." Margaret cupped her son's cheek, her fingers steady, strong. "No, darling, he kept you alive for us." Adam approached slowly, respectful. Daniel turned, sizing him up the way soldiers do, evaluating threat, measuring character. Henry placed a supportive hand on Adam's back. "This man saved us," he said with quiet gratitude. Daniel offered his hand, firm and honest. Adam accepted with a nod. They didn't need many words. Soldiers recognize each other by the way they carry sorrow and purpose in their spine. As the afternoon sun slanted the gold across the ridge, Daniel helped reinforce the cabin door and marked safer routes around the property. He spoke of leaving the Navy soon, too many years gone, too many nights he'd prayed just to hold his parents' hands again. Henry and Margaret watched their son and Ranger working side by side, a perfect union of soldier and guardian. Later, they all shared hot soup by the fire. Margaret's laugh, soft but real, filled the room like music. Ranger curled between Daniel's boots, eyes finally at peace. The wind outside softened, as though blessing the home it once sought to break. Silver Ridge had turned from a place of exile into sanctuary, a place where a family once discarded had rebuilt love from splinters and snow. And as night fell, Henry whispered to himself, "We're not lost anymore." Ranger lifted his head, listening, then rested again, his mission fulfilled, yet never finished. In every quiet miracle, a breath regained, a family restored, a loyal dog guiding us home, we glimpse the gentle hands of God at work. Even in the darkest valleys, he sends light in forms we least expect. A son returning, a guardian with four paws, a love that refuses to give up. May this story remind us that healing is possible. Faith still moves mountains and hope always finds a way. If this touched your heart, please share, leave a comment, and subscribe so more souls can feel God's love through these stories. May the Lord bless you and keep you today and always.